Hello, everyone. Welcome. We'll give folks a few moments here to join. If you're just joining, feel free to share in the chat where you're dialing in from or where you're traveling to in the coming weeks ahead for the holiday season. We'd love to get to know our audience.
Windy, Colorado. Amen. We were just talking about that.
We were. There are things rolling down my street right now from the winds we're having here. Welcome, everyone. We'll just give folks a moment or two to join on in. Oh, welcome from Israel.
Israel, that's great.
Is it really late there? What time is it there? Thank you for joining at a probably inconvenient hour.
Madison, Madtown. There we go. 8 o'clock. Okay, yeah. Chicago, Chi-Town.
Whoop, whoop.
Land of the Grabowskis. Where I'm from.
Folks from everyone, New Zealand as well. Welcome. Glad to have you here.
Nashville. I want to be in Nashville. That looks good.
That looks beautiful. Yeah. I would prefer sunny and 70 to the winds we're having here in Colorado. Fantastic. Well, welcome everyone. I'm sure folks will continue to roll in, but we will go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us today for the last Customer Success Unlocked of 2021. I'm Marley Wagner. I'm the Senior Director of Marketing and Services here at ESG, and I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar titled The Two Sides to Driving Organizational Change. Before we get started, just a few quick housekeeping notes. First, today's session will be a fireside chat style interview, so you won't be seeing slides on the screen, but I promise that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with your Zoom. Second, I'd like to just remind everyone that we are recording the session, and a link to the recording will be shared with you all within 24 hours. So you'll get it midday tomorrow here in the US. Throughout the session, please submit your questions. The Q&A tab is located on the bottom of your screen. We would love to answer as many questions as we possibly can. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome today's presenter, a man who, in my opinion, really needs no introduction, Mr. Ed Powers.
Hey, Marley, good to see you. Always a pleasure.
So glad to have you. Really looking forward to our conversation. So I know I joked you don't need any intro, but you have a ton of experience in this space that we're talking about today. So I want to just have you start off by giving folks a little bit of context, a little bit about you and your background.
Sure. Lots of gray hair, as you can see. I've been in business a long time, done sales and marketing and operations. I've done multiple startups, been working in customer success for about the last 9 years or so, both as an executive as well as a consultant. I'm known as a neuroscience geek. I'm really into how the brain works and analytics and continuous improvement. And full disclosure, I'm doing some work with ESG these days. So a really great relationship there and working with ESG and some of their clients. So pleased to be with you.
Awesome. And we're so happy to have you. I'm happy to have you here chatting with me today. And we're so happy to have you supporting us on many of our client engagements. So today we are talking about managing change. Change is everywhere. It is constant. It is in our business lives, in our personal lives, and in everything, right? But tell us, Ed, what are we talking about when we say change in this context today for this conversation? Yeah,
a lot of times you see change management, people think, well, is that revision control? We have our software, we're going from 2.3.2 to 2.3.3, that's managing change. No. Is it updating our contract, new scope of work? Is that change management? Well, no, the context here is just what you said, Marley. It's, when we change technology, when we change process, when we change organizational structures, when you have a new boss, all these things are things that personally affect you. And how do we process that? How do we respond to that? That's really what the topic is today.
And how do we see changes like that typically done and executed, Ed?
Yeah, sadly, and I've heard this referred to before. I think it's a great way to describe it. Mostly what you see happen in companies is the email goes out on Monday for training on Tuesday, for cutover on Wednesday, and then on Thursday you have total chaos, right? I mean, that's really the norm, and we probably all have experienced that from time to time. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all been there, right? And that's really hard. So I would imagine you've seen a lot of not so fantastic reactions to that particular scenario over the years.
Yeah, and and we all have problems with that, right? We all push back either actively or passively, right? I mean, this is we all when things are happen like that, you're like, whoa, what just happened here,
Yeah. So you just said actively and passively. So want to make sure we're speaking the same language and the audience is as well. So when you say actively, you mean they're pushing back pretty forcefully, sometimes even with anger and really strong resistance, right? Versus the passive, meaning people are just not engaging. They're not showing up for training or for meetings, or they're not putting in the effort, avoiding whatever it is that you're trying to change. Is that right?
Exactly. And the active stuff you can identify because someone blows up on you, but the passive stuff is always going on, and there's a lot of symptoms of that. Like you say, they won't show up, or they have a task to do this and they never get it done. And you hear a lot of these frustrations with customer success that people say they disappeared. I had my training and 3 people showed up. There's supposed to be 30 in the room. So you kind of see those things, and sometimes people will even work around it, right? They really don't want to go with this thing, so they'll find some workaround, or they'll sabotage what's going on. There's all kinds of interesting ways that passively people will resist too.
Yeah, those passive resistance situations, like you said, are even more difficult to identify and sometimes even more difficult to rectify, right?
Yeah.
So talk to us, you mentioned all of the neuroscience that you've gotten into. You and I have had a lot of conversations over the years about, hey, how do people's brains react to not just change, but to anything, to new information, to what have you. So can you tell us kind of from that perspective, why is change so hard for people, even when it is in their best interests?
Yeah, and you would think people would just see the benefit and say, I'm all in, right? So there's really 2 things. The first thing is perception of loss. Mm-hmm. And the second is really changing routines. And both of those, our brains kind of push back. So the first one is perception of loss. And this is something that we get from behavioral science, behavioral economics, that we're twice as sensitive to losses as we are to gains. So even though you frame something as, hey, this is great, it's good for our customers, it's good for you, we kind of look for the downside, right? What are we giving up to get that? And we tend to fixate on that. So things like, gee, I was an expert before in the old way of doing things, and now we're going to this new way, and I'm no longer the expert. I'm giving up some status here. Or, I got 138 things on my plate and I have to carve out time to go learn this. This isn't fair to me. So I'm giving up a sense of fairness. So when we perceive that there's loss, that activates our defense mechanisms and we react to that, either actively or passively.
Yeah, that makes sense. SaaS companies, technology companies are all in the business of really making things better through technology. But that doesn't mean that users are automatically just going to kind of upset their daily routine and flip that switch to adopt it. Can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, and there's been some interesting studies on this, is that, about 40% of our day is just routine, right? And a great example is, pre-COVID, we used to commute to the office. We used to get in our car and drive to work, right? And you think about that, it's like, well, you were in that routine. That's what you did every day. And you would drive to work and listen to the radio, talk on the phone, or just thinking about your day ahead. And meanwhile, you're driving this 2,000-pound car from your driveway to work, and you're not giving that a second thought. So you have all this stuff that your brain just kind of automatically does in your subconscious. And then when you upset that routine, your brain has to completely rewire itself, right? I mean, that's what scientists call reversal learning. And they've studied that. And one of the interesting things is that when we do that, the brain uses a neurotransmitter called serotonin. And it uses serotonin to suppress the old behavior so it can build a new behavior, right? So it uses up the serotonin. Well, when serotonin levels drop, that changes people's moods, right? People get more anxious, they get angry, they get testy, they can, they're more stressed out. You hear about serotonin being the chill molecule, right? So they're less chill. And it's just because their brains are working hard to rewire themselves to do this new routine. And that's another reason why people want to push back.
I think that, that example you used, Ed, of pre-COVID, where we were all used to driving to work, is so powerful. If you think about it, yep, that was the normal for most people in our industry. They were going into an office every day or most days. And all of a sudden, that switch flipped. And no one was going. And even those of us, myself included, who now prefer working from home, I love my home office. It was hard at first, right? It was really difficult because all of a sudden my normal was so disrupted.
Exactly. Yep.
So how do we as individuals or we as leaders who are trying to help our teams overcome our own resistance to those kinds of changes?
Yeah, and think, COVID is a good example, and other examples like maybe you lose someone that's close to you, maybe they die, or maybe a relationship changes, and maybe you have a friend that's going through that. They need to kind of unpack that. They need to process that emotionally, talk about it, think about it, and then eventually they come to a point where it's less painful, and they're ready to move forward. So we all kind of go through that same process. We're all human beings. Our customers are too.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, that balance between sort of the conscious and the subconscious is so interesting there as well. I know you've talked a lot about that in the past. Talk to us about that balance in overcoming that.
Yeah, and it's both fronts. It's you have to make a conscious choice at some point in time. Emotionally, you're going to react, you're going to respond. It's all completely natural and normal. But at some point, you need to come to a decision and say, okay, I accept this, I'm going to move on, and that takes time, and that takes energy, and it takes some processing. Yeah.
So I think that time and energy and processing that you're talking about really leads us to my next question. Can you help us define what the term change management really means?
Yeah, it's and this is something that was really started by John Kotter back in the 90s. He wrote he was with Harvard Business School, and he wrote a series of articles in Harvard Business Review and a book, and it was called Leading Change. And he kind of started this whole movement or this whole industry in change management. And I think it's really all about smoothing the path, making that transition easier for people. And, being very thoughtful about it, helping people embrace that change. That's really what this is about. Knowing that people go through this, how do we make that easier for them?
And talk to us about why, that sort of organized practice of change management is so important.
Well, I really like a company called ProSci, and they've done a ton of research. They have all kinds of resources. We'll talk about them quite a bit today, but they've done some interesting research over the years, and they found that the difference between managing change and not managing it, you are 6 times more likely to achieve your desired business outcomes if you manage the people side of change right alongside the project management that you do. So 6 times. It is not a little effect. Yeah. It is a very, very big effect. And that's because, we all struggle with adoption, in customer success. People aren't adopting this. They're not embracing it. And that's a symptom of this. If you have more people coming along, they're accepting it, they're processing it, they make it part of their daily routine, then with more people comes more impact on the process, comes more impact on the financials, which is the desired outcome that we're going for. So all of this is tied together.
Yes, and I think that's so important, right? I think we as an industry in customer success are really, really good at developing new processes and new this, new that, new everything all the time, right? Our industry is changing constantly. We're always developing new things, understanding new things, learning new things. Where I think sometimes we forget is, oh yeah, we can't just roll out that process and say go. We do have to manage that human side that you mentioned. It's so, so important. You know, you and I have talked in the past about how it's pretty easy to predict people's reactions to change. So I would love it if you could share an example of that and kind of what a good change process can look like.
Yeah, and I think if people have taken psychology classes, you've probably heard the name Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She was really active in the 60s, and she worked with terminally ill patients. And she noticed that they all kind of went through the same stages when they were kind of accepting that, you know, they were terminal. And that kind of got people thinking of, wow, human behavior in certain conditions is very repeatable. And if we know what to expect, you know, then we can adapt to that. We can predict that. We can influence it. So change management is kind of the same thing. ProSci has defined a model called ADKAR, which describes successful individual change. So ADKAR stands for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. So awareness, you know, what are we changing? Who's affected? Why are we changing this? When are we changing this? You know, getting awareness to, hey, folks, this is coming, right? And you're going to be affected by it. Then there's desire, which is what we just talked about, is people have to process that. They have to have an emotional reaction. They have to get to a point where they make a decision and they say, I'm going to go along with this, or maybe not, right? That's the D phase, the desire phase. Then there's knowledge. Of course, we know that. We train people. Ability is, okay, you have this training. Now, how do you put it in practice? What enables you to do that? Technology, data, you know, processes, are there rewards and recognitions, metrics? What supports the implementation of that new behavior? And then the last one, our reinforcement, is so important because we're changing habits, we're changing routines. So how do we reinforce until this becomes just second nature, just like driving a car? So that's a really good model, and I think it's very useful in what we do.
Absolutely. And I think about how that can be applied in so many different ways to so many different audiences, right? So if we're talking about an internal change, a process change, or an organizational restructure, or, you know, things like that, I'd imagine that kind of ADKAR process is really required for everybody involved. You know, thinking internally, I'm thinking, okay, CEO all the way to frontline employees, right?
That's exactly right. I mean, we're all human beings, right? We all have those natural, normal human reactions. And, you know, when you think about deploying something, right, all those people have to change in a certain sequence, right? You need to have those people, you know, a manager has to go through that process before they can turn around and help their own people, right? So there's this kind of cascading effect that goes through the organization, and we need to expect that, right?
Yeah, again, with the predictability, right? We can predict that, hey, just because someone is in a leadership position doesn't mean they're not human. They need to go through that process too. That's a really good point. So one thing that I really wanted to focus on today, and kind of our theme of the day, is that there are two sides to driving organizational change, right? Both the internal, like we've been talking about, and the external, the customer facing change. So can you elaborate on that a little bit for us?
Yeah, and in customer success, we have it on both fronts, don't we? I mean, we've got it with our customers when we roll something out. We're changing what our customers are doing and what their users are doing day to day, so they're impacted by that. And then internally, we're trying to influence change. If we're, you know, it takes the whole enterprise to retain more customers and to grow those accounts. It's not just this one little silo sitting in customer success. So how do we influence and drive change internally? So it's really on both fronts that we need to do it.
Yeah, and I think that is so important, and maybe even unique to the customer success industry in some ways, that we really have to be very conscious of that in both of those areas. So I want to talk about sort of your top keys, like the most important things to successfully managing change. What are those?
Yeah, and there's really three, and this comes from ProSci again. All the research is that you really need to have solid top-down executive sponsorship. You also need to have good project management, which our audience, you know, we do that well. We know how to manage projects. And the last thing, working in parallel, is executing good change management. And it takes really all three in those areas.
Narrow in a little bit more for us on executive sponsorship and exactly what you mean by that term.
Yeah, it's really three things there, is that it's active and visible participation, right? So is this senior executive engaged? That person that's driving this change, do we see them? Are they present? Do they show up? Do they care? And just having them participate sends a huge signal. The second is building coalitions, right? There's people, when they look through their organization, they're going to know people that they need because they're working with these folks to execute this. And they're going to know, or we help them understand, this person's on board, that person we're having some challenges with, right? So they're going to have to sit down and have a conversation with that person. And the last one is communication, right? It's just, they have to be part of the communication cycle.
Yeah. I'm curious, Ed, I hear you about that executive sponsorship. That obviously is powerful. Do you think that's a requirement though? What about change happening at a grassroots level?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I think it's certainly possible to have some local successes here and there.
Yeah.
But to get the whole company or a big group of people, it really requires a top-down. Great example is the civil rights movement, right? I mean, when that initially started out, you had the Rosa Parks and you had protests that were happening and they kind of built steam and momentum. And then you had the March on Washington and Martin Luther King. But what really changed it for the country was the Civil Rights Act. It took Lyndon Johnson and Congress working with Martin Luther King to make it the law of the land. And that's what really got the whole country, civil rights. So it really requires all of it. Yes, you can get it started, but to really make that fundamental change, it's got to be top down.
Okay, that makes sense. I love that example. Very powerful. All right. So, I want to talk about the communication component of change and change management. Obviously, my background, and so this is part of our conversation that I was really excited for, because I think the communication factor and component can be forgotten sometimes, and it can be sort of an afterthought. Oh yeah, we have to your point, the first step is awareness. Oh yeah, we have to tell people what we're doing and why we're doing it, right? So talk to us about that need for communication, what kinds of communication that requires, what that looks like.
Yeah, and again, this is in your wheelhouse. You know this, you probably know way more about this than I do, but it's the issue of how do we get a message out there at the right time to the right depth, right? You don't want to give too much and inappropriate things to the right audience. How do we send that message? What are the ways that we send that message? Email is certainly one way, but you have to tell people over and over and over again. And what are the various ways that they're going to hear about this? And you need to have a plan. You need to orchestrate that,
Yeah, thinking about what different channels can I use, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yes, I sent an email. Did everyone read the email? Definitely not, right? So can we have a town hall? Can we also share, a video of that executive sponsor that we talked about, presenting on why this matters to the company, and send it through Slack or Zoom chat? Or can we record a webinar like this, answering those frequently asked questions on the new plan and speaking to that change? I think that's so true. It's not just, hey, I communicated, I sent one thing, so everyone, right? It's not a checkbox. It's a constant reiteration, and all the way, to the R of ADKAR of reinforcement. You need more communication to continue reinforcing. So it really is not just a one and done component. I love that.
Exactly.
Awesome. Yeah. So what else is important? We talked about communication. What else is really important to manage through that change?
Yeah, and you think about it, that you have different people that need to do different things. You have that senior executive, and they need to have some plan of, looking at their org chart and figuring out who do I need to convince and what's my plan, because they need to cascade this down and get people comfortable throughout the organization. So they have work to do. They need a sponsor plan. You need to have a plan for those first level supervisors, because they manage good change and bad change. How do we prepare them? Because they're going to get the blowback from their team. And when they think through, okay, Charlie's going to be on board here, but I'm going to have a real problem over here with Bill. really thinking about that and what's their response and how do I help them through that emotional process, and the practical, things of we have to move workloads around and find training time and all of this stuff. So the supervisors need a plan. And then the last one is a training plan, which of course we all know. And to your point, reinforcement. Training is not just a checkbox and event, it's a process. Does our training plan allow for reinforcement? Because if it doesn't, they're not going to take those new habits, right?
Yeah, and even the ability component of EdCard, does our training plan account for practice, right? Yep. Real life practice with an expert there to help. Yes, so important. Can you guys hear the wind outside of my windows right now? Because I can, and it is wild. Ignore the squeaking noises. We talked about, customer success has a really unique perspective, I think, on change management, because we have both that internal view and then how we use it with our customers. So let's talk about how change management can be really utilized to help onboarding go more smoothly. We all know, onboarding is the most important phase of the customer journey. The seeds of churn are planted early. How do we use change management to make it go smooth?
Yeah, and you think about it, if we do a lot of deployments, we work with a lot of different customers, and we're attentive and we watch what happens on the customer, the change management side, we can figure out what works and what doesn't. I mean, we're gonna have a lot of times at bat here deploying this solution to a lot of different customers, and we can learn from that and we can templatize these things, right? So if we know this is what really separates a great deployment from a bad one, this change management factor was done effectively here, how do we make that simple? How do we make that easy? How do we build that into our project plan so that it's not just, oh, by the way, I need you to send these messages in this way. Let me give you the talking points for that, right? So we can start to build this into our motion and make it easier for our customers to adapt and to adopt.
Yes, I love that. One of the things that we see a lot with a lot of ESG's customers, actually, related to onboarding, is we help them build these customer success plans that their teams can then utilize at the beginning of the relationship with their end users. I think we've seen a lot of change management required in building and implementing and using those. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a golden opportunity. You hear CSMs complain about, my executive sponsor doesn't show up, they're not engaged, blah, 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 blah. Customer success planning is a great time to engage them early, right? Early in the process, ideally even before the close, and keep them engaged throughout, right? And this is not, customer success planning is not a slide dump. It's not, an email that you send out. It's a conversation, right? And it's sitting down with that senior sponsor, and you want to have 5 things happen here. The first is they need to know what a CSM is and who you are and what you're going to do for them. That needs to be abundantly clear, is that I'm on your side and I'm going to work with you to this. My job is your success and satisfaction. That's what I do for a living. The next thing is you need to agree on how that customer, how that contact is going to define success and how they're going to measure it. So a lot of times, these folks may already know how they're going to measure it. Many times they don't. And if they don't know, well, let me make some suggestions. Customers just like you that I've worked with several times measure it this way. What do you think? Oh, that sounds great. The next thing you want to do is set expectations. And of course, we know salespeople that can oversell and promise the sun, moon, and the stars. But there's this other factor of, most salespeople aren't like that. There are some exceptions. Most of them really do care. The customers are going to be happy and successful because they know they're going to buy more downstream and refer the company and things like that. So most of them do care. But we are all optimists. We all have optimism bias. We all look at something, we think the future is going to be much rosier than it is, that we're going to get much, much better results than we actually do. We all underestimate how much time a project takes, right? On Sundays, we think this is an hour project, and then 4 hours goes by and you're still not done with it, right? We all underestimate what that really takes. So we all are naturally biased to think, to be have very high expectations, right? So it's critically important. If they know what the, we've agreed on what success looks like, let me show you a distribution here. We work with a lot of different customers. We have some customers that get, 0 productivity gain, and we have other ones that get 34%. The average is around 17. And then, we have some customers that can get this done in 3 weeks, and we have some customers that take 6 months. Oh, well, tell me more about that. Well, why is it that some people get really great? I'm glad you asked. That's the next point, which is key success factors. One of them could be change management. It's not a list of 138 things. It's like 3 things. If we do these 3 things really, really well, I'm going to get you those results, right? This is what we've learned through experience working with customers just like you. That executive is listening. They know there's value in that. The last thing you want to do in the success plan is get their commitment specifically, right? Just like in sales, you got to ask for the order. But you say, look, Bill, I can deliver those results, but change management is really important. Here's what I need you to do specifically. I need you to participate in our kickoff call. We'll schedule that as soon as this deal closes, but I need you there because you need to tell the team what this is all about. Can I count on you for doing that? Of course. Okay, Bill, we're going to have training for our end users. Can you spend 15 minutes to give a little bit of an overview to the team about why they're doing this and why it's so important? Absolutely, count me in. Bill, one of the things that we get to at about the 90-day mark is our first value review, where we go through and we show you progress against your success goals. It's really important for you to be there. Can I count on you? Of course. Here's the name of my admin assistant. Let's get these things on the calendar. I'm all in. Why? Because they know that you're working in their behalf and you're giving them something that you need from them. If you go there and say, oh, I just need your help, what does that mean, right? So be very, very specific. Get them on the hook. And if they make that commitment, they're going to be there.
Yes. And I've heard you say this so many times now, Ed, but I love it. And I think it's so helpful in thinking about a customer success plan. It is a conversation, not a presentation, right? I've stolen that vernacular from you. I hope you don't mind. But I think that's, again, just so helpful in thinking about it, right? It's not for a CSM to be showing a million slides and giving a monologue and all that. It is to truly engage with that customer, that executive sponsor at your customer, and understand where they're trying to go. And guess what? It makes the CSM's job so much easier down the line.
Yep, exactly.
Yes. So, okay, we talked about CS plans and, CSM interacting with end user and that executive sponsor. How about, let's talk a little more about, internal within the CSM's own organization here.
Yeah, and like we talked about before, there's change internally that you need to do. You have to change your product, change your processes, make improvements. Mm-hmm. There's a reason why customers are leaving, and if we can identify what those are, we got to make some changes. And that's hard for a lot of folks. I think change management is such a basic practice. Really good leaders do it kind of intuitively, but when you put a little bit of process on that and you have a structure, man, it gets so much easier, right? I mean, so part of this, and I think when you look at really successful senior VPs and customer success and chief customer officers, they get this. They know that they're doing that behind the scenes stuff, because if we're trying to retain more customers and grow that install base, it takes a village, right? We got to get everybody on this, and you need to know how to get other people mobilized and drive that change.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know you have a really good example to share of a company that uses change management, both as part of their customer success practice, as well as to manage internal change really, really successfully. Can you share that example with us?
Yeah, surprisingly, Microsoft is really good at this. Microsoft has a very good internal change management practice. It's been written up, recognized. They do really good work. And they also use it in their customer success motion. And in fact, there is a blog, which we'll talk about here in the resources. Emma Steffen, who was in customer success at Microsoft, talks about how they have templatized this and that they look for specific things in their onboarding that they have some countermeasures for. So they've integrated this for their Azure, for Microsoft 365, all the Office products, as well as for their Dynamics, which is their CSM platform. So in those applications that will hit a lot of people and really affect a lot of lives, they've integrated this in their customer success motion.
So impressive. I need to go read more about Microsoft doing this now. I know you've told me this, but I'm like, that's so fascinating. Okay, I have a couple more questions for you, Ed, but before I ask, want to just remind everyone out there, please go ahead and submit your questions for Ed in the Q&A tab at the bottom right of your screen. We will have quite a bit of time still for questions from you all, so want to make sure we're getting those in. So Ed, before we get to audience questions, we're going to share some resources with everyone, but before we do that, you know, something that you and I see a lot with the ESG customers that you're supporting us on is that either they're, you know, introducing customer success as a brand new function of the company, right? Or maybe it's sort of existed in its own little world, but everybody else everywhere in the company really didn't know that. And so there's so much change management required when we're really making the, you know, the presence of customer success known internally within these technology companies. Can you talk a little bit about that? Maybe you have an example or two to share, or just share some wisdom that you've seen over the years in that environment.
Yeah, and ESG, I think, is really well positioned to help. You know, there's this transformation that's happening in these very large, global, established companies. It's not, you know, customer success is not just the born in the cloud startup. It's monster-sized companies like HP, like Aruba, like other ones who are, their customers are telling them, look, we don't want to buy infrastructure. We don't want to build out a data center. We want to buy this as a subscription, right? So all of these very traditional businesses, you know, been around for years and years and years, are like, well, what's the subscription thing? And how is that different from what we've been doing all along? And they've got this massive, you know, global infrastructure and partners and all of that. This is not a little thing. This is a big thing, even though it's a fairly small change, right? I mean, in the grand scheme of things, you know, they know that this is where things are going. It may start out as a very small thing that's going to grow and be a very big thing. So they, you know, those senior leaders look at this and say, how are we going to do this? And I think ESG is really well positioned to help with that, because that's not easy by any stretch. When you're that entrenched and you're that complicated, and then you bring in this new thing, change management is so important.
Yes, absolutely. Awesome. So I'm starting to see some audience questions rolling in. Thank you all. Keep sending those over through the chat or the Q&A tab. But before we get to those, we did want to share some of the resources that Ed mentioned earlier. So you guys have those at your fingertips as sort of continued learning on this topic. So we'll go ahead and pop the slide up on the screen here. Ed, do you want to just talk through kind of what these resources are, why you recommend them, and then folks, we will be sure to include this slide along with the recording when we send it out, so you can actually click those links if you'd like to.
Yeah, that's great. So first one up there, terrific book, John Cotter and Dan Cohen, wonderful book, quick read, Heart of Change. And it talks about his 8-step process. You know, John Cotter was the guy who kind of started this whole thing, but he went back and he's telling stories about successful change, and a lot of great examples, a lot of great stories. It will get you motivated to go do this just by reading it. It's really well done, quick read, highly recommended. ProSci, I mentioned them. They have a lot of resources. They do certification. I'm certified with ProSci. There's a couple of blogs on there. One I wrote, and I mentioned Emma Steffen at Microsoft, and she talks about specifics. Here's where we applied this model in our customer success motion. That's worth a read. That she just did that a little while ago. Success coaching, many of you may know or heard about them. They do certification in customer success, a lot of training. They have a module, Change Management for Customer Success. It's a 3-day kind of a program, and that's focused on putting change into this customer success motion. So that's available. And then, of course, ESG. I mean, ESG's business is helping. You know, if you're one of these CSMs that's buried in a giant company and you're thinking, how on earth am I going to do this? And you have this enormous task, ESG is a great resource for you.
Thanks for the plug, Ed. We appreciate you. Awesome. So like I said, we will send that slide out along with the recording, so everyone has the links to those resources. So I want to get to some questions. First question is from Lucas. He says, I'd love to know, how do we introduce customer success within customer experience and manage the change in responsibilities and potentially employees who are concerned that their jobs will change? Love this question.
Yeah, great question. Great question. And I would say, let's look at ADCAR here, right? Of course, this is going to be disruptive. Of course, people are going to react. Of course, people are going to push back and say, wait a minute, that's my job, right? What you already taken away from me here. So people are going to have that reaction. So when you think about ADCAR, we want to facilitate that. We want people to be aware. What is this? Why is it important? Why is this different from what we're doing now? What are the benefits of that? Having a senior executive communicate that of, hey, we need both here. This is a different motion, and here's what it's intended to do. So we need to raise awareness. That's the A. The D is we need to tell them what's in it for them and what the benefits are and how this is going to affect them, and let them process that and help them process that and say, well, you're going to be part of this. We'd love to have you part of this, and let's move together with on this issue. There's going to be some training. That's the K. Okay, so how is this different? Maybe we do some enablement structurally. We change the organization. We hire some people. We need to enable this change. Technology deployment processes. We need to put those things into place, and then we need to reinforce. Here's what we did. Why this is important. What it's doing for us. Everybody's going to learn a new motion. Reinforce, reinforce. Those responsibilities will change. Many times that will come off the plates, which is good from support. And then into customer success, and there's some delineation. So all of this needs to be carefully orchestrated. Of course, you got to implement it, but people have to walk them through ADCAR. If they're stuck, it's probably because you didn't do a good job of awareness and you didn't do a good job of the desire phase. Everything else after that is mechanical.
Yeah, and I think it's really an important point you just made in that desire phase, Ed. It's okay to let people feel their feelings, right? People being upset, people, not liking new information that they're hearing the first time they hear it is okay, right? It doesn't mean they're not going to get on board. It doesn't mean that they're not going to continue through the change process with you. It's just a step you have to kind of allow people time and emotional space to take on their own, right?
Exactly. We all go through it and we all process it differently, right? And we just need to be patient. And leaders need to know how to guide people through that, and it's okay. And we'll get there,
Yep. Awesome. Thank you. All right. Another question. This one's from Ariana. Any tips or recommended reading for handling a new pricing model rollout to customers?
Yeah.
Great question.
Yeah. Talk about disruptive. That's really disruptive. And I can tell a personal story on that one. We had to double our pricing. And if we didn't, the company would have gone under. This was when 2008, when the whole world changed. So yes, that is extremely difficult. And you talk about loss. Right now, we're giving up more money for this thing that we thought we were paying. We were comfortable with this. Now we're losing money on this proposition potentially. So again, ADCAR, awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, reinforcement. How do we make them aware of what this is, what this means, how it impacts you, why we're doing this, what the benefits are. If it's a different structure, maybe there's some upside here. We're charging less for this and more for that. It may affect you these ways or those ways. So awareness. Of course, we know this is a change. We know this is going to be difficult. This may impact some, let's empathize and sympathize with customers. This isn't easy. We're with you on this. And we know, we believe that we deliver a lot of value. Here's the ROI, even with the new pricing. We believe we value you as customers, and we get it. If you choose you do not want to go forward, God bless you. We're going to help you in that transition. We hope that that's not the case, and we want to continue working with you, right? So then it's the other pieces of executing that change and being patient, being comfortable, and you're going to lose some customers. If you're going to jack that, we kept 80% of ours, which is better than what we thought. We thought we'd maybe only retain half. We doubled our price and kept over 80% of our customers. And we had to, otherwise the company wouldn't survive. So, you got to do what you got to do. And as long as you work them through ADCAR, people will process that. They will get it, give them time, give them space. And then, yeah, okay, we're going to make some decisions. And we hope it's the right ones.
Yeah, Ed, that question for Mariana and your answer has a bunch of thoughts rolling around in my head now. Right, if we think about the first example that came to my mind was all of the millions of streaming services that we all now pay for. How many emails have you gotten from whoever, Apple TV or YouTube TV or HBO Max or I don't know, all of them that are like, hey, as of XYZ date, our price is going up. It's only like $2 a month or whatever. It's nominal usually, but they do that all the time. I'd be really curious. I wonder if there are stats out there about how much churn they have, as a
Yeah.
consumer business when they do that, because that's happening constantly in that business model.
Absolutely. And my wife, it's funny, we have Comcast, right? And they keep inching it up higher and higher. And then she hits that threshold and she says, I'm going to cancel, right? She goes through that whole thing and then they come back and then they, do their save. But yeah, I mean, it's constantly going on, but it's all about communication, making people comfortable with this, and people get it. I mean, everybody's dealing with change. All of our customers are. It's just, it's AdCar again. Yeah.
And I imagine, not so much in the TV subscription example, but in your example you shared, I imagine you guys notified your customers way far in advance, right? Especially if we're talking about a significant increase, like a doubling of cost. People need to plan and budget for that. They not only have to, go through the emotional change, but there's actually the tactical, logistical changes that they need to be able to make too. So the sooner you can tell people, the better.
Yeah, and we we had the emails, we had the town halls with our customers. We invited them to come to a webinar on this, and we talked them through it, and we followed up one-on-one. We had a strategy to have a personal connection with everyone and to talk them through it. And yeah, we got blowback. We got a lot of people very upset, and we had to just be consistent and firm. And this is really important, and we believe we're offering that value to you, and most of them agreed with that.
Mm-hmm. And I imagine, not only product price changes, but, we all know monetization of customer success is really a huge ultimate goal of a lot of CS leaders. I bet the process is pretty similar for that pricing conversation too.
Exactly, especially if you're changing something on someone. They used to get it for free, now they got to pay for it. I mean, wow, really? That's going to force a reaction. Better, to avoid that altogether and say, we're going to grandfather you in this, and it'll be for new customers and just FYI, right? Or on your, we're going to waive it for this year, but on your next renewal, it's going to be coming, right? So to be fair to everybody. So there's ways that you can do this, but yeah, you can't just spring it on them and hope for the best.
Yep. That's a pro. Those are pro tips on monetization right there from Ed Powers. Okay. Oh, question from one of our own ESGers, 80. 80 is asking, how would you recommend best incorporating change management into a project plan or program plan? Love this question.
Great question. Yeah. And I would say it depends upon, is this something that you can execute in a templatized fashion, right? So if you're in customer success and you've seen this enough times, you can have these templates kind of off the shelf. Hey, this is what's worked for some customers, copy and paste that in, we'll tailor it a little bit, boom, it's done. If it's a custom change and it's something that, you're seeing for the first time and there's massive complexity here, it's real hard to templatize that, right? I mean, you almost have to have a separate change management plan that you're executing together, and whether that's a project manager or a change manager. A lot of times in these big companies, you got both.
Yeah.
Right. And maybe it's someone on the customer side, on the client side, that you need to partner with, and you need to coach them along, and they pick it up, but you're going to help them do this, right? So there's probably a couple of different formats, but just understanding what is this, who's impacted, what is this going to take, crafting a plan, a lot of times it has to be very custom.
Yes. Awesome. Okay. And question from Kathleen. Kathleen, I love this question so much. I think super relevant to probably a lot of people who are here with us. So Kathleen asks, what would your recommendations be for resetting expectations with customers for the role their CSM plays? My current team is about to undergo a huge shift where they have been the catch-all and responsible for a lot of tasks that they will no longer continue to own in 2022. Things like support and implementation. Kathleen's looking for tips on addressing this change with their customer base.
And in fact, we're doing that with some of VSG's clients, exactly the same thing. And when it's a personal relationship, it sounds like between a customer, a contact, and a person, and we're shifting that. Where you're losing that contact, that relationship, and bringing in a new relationship potentially, right? I used to rely on this person to do these things. Now I got these unknown people, a help desk or whatever I got to work with. Yeah, that's impactful, right? I mean, part of really good customer success is building trust along the way. And, it's not only your product delivers value, but I trust the brand and I trust the people behind it. And that's hard earned. And customers get that. And the stickiest thing we have is our human relationship. So yeah, that's impactful. And having a plan to do that and to add car that one, we're making this change. Here's how it will benefit you. Here's what it means to you. Here's how things are going to be different, right? We know that this may be difficult for some, and we're going to smooth this as easily as we can. We're going to get on the phone with certain customers that are big and important. We're going to talk them through it, right? We're not just going to send them an email. Then we execute that change, and then we reinforce it. And one of the interesting things is that, you can actually make this. There's some tricks that you can use to maybe make that transition a little bit easier, right? So for example, let's say that you have a customer support person or customer success person who is doing all the support, and you want to get them out of that business, right? You want to make them more proactive, and you want to encourage customers to start using the support line. Well, make it add a little bit of friction here. Don't get back to that customer in, 8 seconds. Let that sit for a little while. You want fast response? That's the number to call. They're going to turn that around much faster. I got these other things, right? So you dial it down and you add a little friction to keep reinforcing that. They'll make that transition. So there are some clever ways of kind of attacking that, but we go back to recognize this is impactful and we need to guide people through it, including customers.
Yes, so important. And Kathleen, thank you again. That's an excellent question. I think, gosh, I feel like everybody has gone through some sort of that version of that in their, career in customer success, right? Whether it's, hey, we didn't have support before and now we do, or, now we have a separate implementation team who's bringing on new customers themselves, or, hey, now we have a pooled model for some customers versus dedicated CSMs. Any of those changes, like you said, to that human interaction between customer and brand really need to be addressed through this method.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times our own fear gets in the way. I think we anticipate the worst. And customers are smart. They deal with this stuff all the time. And give them a little bit of credit. Of course they're going to react. Of course they're going to be disappointed. Of course they're going to have to process that. Of course. But it's not the end of the world. They will adapt. They will adjust. We just need to help them through it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, another question just popped in. This is a really interesting one too. So this one reads, how would you recommend I manage an internal org chart change that was not communicated to the primary stakeholder? This change won't impact customers, but it is affecting my relationship with colleagues.
Yeah, that's a tough one. So you're trying to save a bad process here. Yeah, and I think it's, people, you have to fall on your sword every once in a while and say, you know what, we could have done this better. Let me sit down. Let me talk you through this. There's nothing like having a one-on-one conversation and working through it and say, you know what, that's on me, or that's on us, or, we have a bad situation here. It's tough. I know this is tough on you. I know this is a surprise. It's shocking. This is disappointing, perhaps. This might make you angry. Let's talk through that and let's see if we can find it, and expect that they're going to express this, right? And sit with that and help, just like you would with a friend who's reacting to something that's really difficult. And then say, okay, what can we do here? How can we move this forward? Can't do anything about the past. It is what it is, but let's move forward.
And I think that's really good advice, certainly for this specific situation, but really in any environment where, oops, like maybe we didn't manage that change as well as we could have or should have or would have liked to or whatever, right? Yeah, sometimes you can't have a one-on-one conversation with every single person, but I think there are strategies where, okay, we realized maybe we didn't quite work that process correctly the first time. Let's try again. right?
Yeah.
And there are ways to sort of bring people back around, even if it didn't go as planned initially, right?
Right, and expect it and give them the time and space and help them unpack that and think about it and debate it. I've had a lot of very tough conversations, and people will blow up, and you stick with it, and you don't get personally involved in it. You know what you need to do there, and you help them along, and you're firm with what you're doing, and you get them to the other side of it. But just anticipate, this is what I'm going to have to go through, but I'm going to get through this, and we're both going to come out better on the other side.
Yes, I love that attitude. Well, I'm going to give everyone 5 minutes back in their day before their next meeting. We are going to wrap this up. Ed, thank you again so much for your time today. Really enjoyed our conversation, and thank you to everyone out there who joined us. A quick reminder that you will all receive the recording of this session within 24 hours, and I will hope you will all join us again in the new year for the next episode of Customer Success Unlocked. Thank you all.
Thank you. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.